The crystal sang as Han Solo's hammer struck it, a low, haunting sound that reminded him of wind through the mountains back on Earth. He paused for a moment, sweat dripping from his face onto the alien rock beneath his feet. The sound was beautiful, but it meant nothing good. Each crystal they pulled from these cursed mines would power another Valdorian weapon, another tool to keep his people in chains. "Keep working, human scum!" The voice came from above, harsh and clicking like broken glass. Overseer Velthak stood on the observation platform, his 6 eyes glowing red in the dim light of the cavern. The alien's skin was gray and rough like stone, and his 3-fingered hands gripped an energy whip that could burn through flesh in seconds. Han Solo lifted his hammer again. Around him, dozens of other humans worked in silence. Their clothes were torn rags, their faces dirty and tired, but their eyes still held something the Valdorians could not break. Hope. It was small and hidden, but it was there. The mines of Kepler 442b went deep into the planet's core. The air was hot and thick, and the gravity was heavier than Earth's. Every breath was work. Every step was effort. The Valdorians had built this place to break human spirits, and for many, it worked. But not for all. Han Solo. The voice was soft, barely a whisper. It came from Minji, who worked at the crystal face next to him. She was older than most of the prisoners, maybe 50 Earth years. Her hair was gray and her hands were scarred from years of mining. But her voice was steady and strong. "What is it?" Han Solo whispered back, not looking at her. "The Valdorians had sensors everywhere. They could hear a pin drop from 100 meters away. Tonight, after the 3rd bell, the eastern tunnel." Minji's hammer struck the crystal wall in a steady rhythm. To the guards, it looked like normal work. But Han Solo knew better. The rhythm was a code, one they had developed over months of careful planning. Han Solo nodded slightly and kept working. Tonight would be important. Minji had been gathering information from prisoners all across the mine complex. She had a gift for making people trust her. Even the most broken prisoners would tell her things they told no one else. The workday dragged on. The artificial sun in the cavern ceiling dimmed and brightened according to some alien schedule that made no sense to human minds. Han Solo counted the crystals he pulled from the wall. Each one was the size of his fist and glowed with inner light. Each one would power Valdorian ships for months. But Han Solo was not just counting crystals. He was counting guard rotations, weapon positions, weak spots in the mine's defenses. Before the invasion of Earth, he had been a military engineer. The Valdorians thought they had captured a simple worker. They were wrong. The first bell rang, echoing through the tunnels. Time for the midday meal. The prisoners put down their tools and formed lines. The food was gray paste that tasted like nothing and barely kept them alive. But it was food, and in this place, that was enough. Han Solo sat with Tae Ho, a young man who had been captured during the final battle for Seoul. Tae Ho was maybe 22, with quick hands and quicker eyes. He had been a student before the war, studying art and poetry. Now he was just another number in the Valdorian prison system. "The eastern section," Tae Ho said quietly, spooning the gray paste into his mouth. "I saw something today. New equipment. Heavy guards." Han Solo nodded. He had seen it too. For the past week, the Valdorians had been moving strange machines into that part of the mine. Machines that hummed with power and made the air taste like metal. "What do you think it is?" Tae Ho asked. "Nothing good," Han Solo replied. "The Valdorians don't waste energy on anything that doesn't serve their empire." After the meal, they went back to work. The second bell marked the afternoon shift. The crystals came out of the walls faster now, as if the rock itself was eager to give up its treasures. Han Solo's arms ached, but he kept swinging his hammer. Each strike was measured. Each strike was planned. He thought about Earth, about the green mountains of his homeland, about the smell of rain on summer days, about his sister who had died in the orbital bombardment of Busan. The Valdorians had taken everything from him, but they had not taken his mind. The Valdorians were a proud race. They had conquered 17 worlds and enslaved millions of beings. They saw themselves as the natural rulers of the galaxy. To them, humans were just another primitive species, to be used and discarded. But they had made a mistake. They thought human culture was worthless. They thought human emotions were weakness. They thought human loyalty was stupidity. They were learning how wrong they were. As the day wore on, Han Solo noticed something. Velthak was nervous. The overseer kept checking his communication device and looking toward the eastern tunnels. His tail, which usually hung straight down, was twitching. That was a sign of anxiety in Valdorians. The third bell rang. End of the workday. The prisoners put down their tools and shuffled toward the sleeping chambers. But not all of them. Some, like Han Solo, had other plans. The sleeping chambers were carved from the same crystal-veined rock as the mines. Each prisoner had a small alcove barely big enough to lie down in. There were no doors, no privacy. The Valdorians watched everything, but the Valdorians had not counted on human cleverness. Over the months, the prisoners had learned to move in, the blind spots between sensors. They had learned to speak in codes that the alien computers could not translate. They had learned to be invisible in plain sight. Han Solo waited until the chamber was quiet. Most of the prisoners were asleep, exhausted from the day's labor, but some were awake, staring at the ceiling or whispering prayers to gods the Valdorians had tried to make them forget. Moving slowly, Han Solo slipped from his alcove and made his way toward the eastern tunnel. He had memorized the guard patrol routes weeks ago. He knew exactly when and where to move to avoid detection. The eastern tunnel was darker than the main mining areas. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on the walls. Han Solo could hear the hum of machinery somewhere ahead. Whatever the Valdorians were building, it was big. He found Minji waiting for him in a small alcove that had once held mining equipment. With her were 3 other prisoners he recognized, but did not know well. There was Hye Jin, a thin woman, with intelligent eyes who had been a physicist on Earth. There was Dongwook, a farmer whose broad shoulders and steady hands made him useful for heavy work. And there was Su Min, barely 18, who had been captured trying to help children escape from the burning cities. "You came?" Minji said softly. "Good. We don't have much time." "What did you find?" Han Solo asked. Minji looked at each of them carefully before speaking. "I talked to prisoners from the deep tunnels, the ones who work closest to the new construction. They've seen things, terrible things." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The Valdorians are building a weapon, not just any weapon. Something that can destroy entire planets from across the galaxy." The words hit Han Solo like a physical blow. "How do you know?" "The crystals." Hye Jin spoke up. Her voice was quiet but certain. "I've been studying them. The ones we mine here are special. They can store and focus energy in ways that should be impossible. If you linked enough of them together, you could crack a planet like an egg." Dong-wook finished grimly. Han Sol felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many human worlds are left? 17 confirmed colonies, Minji said. Maybe more in the outer systems, all of them defenseless against something like this. They stood in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Around them, the alien machinery hummed its deadly song. So what do we do? Su-min asked. She was young, but her voice was steady. The war had aged all of them beyond their years. We fight, Han Sol said simply. We find a way to stop them. How? Dong-wook demanded. We're prisoners. We have no weapons, no ships, no way to contact the outside. We have something better, Min-ji said quietly. We have each other, and we have something the Valdorians will never understand. What's that? Tae-ho asked. Min-ji smiled, and for a moment she looked like the teacher she had been before the HFY War. We have the strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. We have the fire that burns in the hearts of the free. We have the knowledge that some things are worth dying for. Han Sol nodded slowly. She was right. The Valdorians had taken everything from them, their homes, their families, their freedom, but they could not take their humanity. They could not take their refusal to surrender. Tomorrow, he said, we start planning. We find out everything we can about this weapon. We map every tunnel, every guard post, every weakness. And then we tear this place apart, the others nodded. One by one, they slipped back to their sleeping chambers, moving like ghosts through the alien darkness. Han Sol was the last to leave. He stood for a moment in the eastern tunnel, listening to the hum of Valdorian machinery. Somewhere in the distance, a crystal sang its haunting song. But to Han Sol, it no longer sounded like mourning. It sounded like a battle cry. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin. The morning bell woke Han Sol from dreams of burning cities. He had been dreaming of Earth again, of the last days before the Valdorian ships blocked out the sun. In his dreams, his sister was still alive, still laughing as she worked in her small garden behind their house in the mountains. But dreams were for the weak. Han Sol pushed the memories away and focused on the present. Today would be different. Today, they would begin to gather the information they needed to strike back at their captors. The gray paste they called breakfast tasted worse than usual. Han Sol forced himself to eat it anyway. A starving man could not fight, and fighting was all that mattered now. Around him, other prisoners ate in silence. Most of them looked broken, their eyes empty and hopeless. But some still had fire in them. Those were the ones he needed to find. Hyejin sat across from him, her thin face focused on her meal. She had been quiet since their meeting in the eastern tunnel, but Han Sol could see her mind working. Before the war, she had been one of Earth's best physicists. The Valdorians thought they had captured a useless academic. They had no idea what kind of weapon they had put in their own prison. The energy patterns, Hyejin whispered, so quietly that Han Sol had to lean forward to hear her. I've been watching them. The crystals don't just store power, they transform it. Han Sol nodded slightly. Into what? Something I've never seen before. Something that could tear holes in space itself. Her voice was scared but steady. If they complete this weapon, no human world will be safe. Distance won't matter. Defenses won't matter. They could reach anywhere in the galaxy. The thought made Han Sol's blood run cold, but it also made him more determined. They had to stop this weapon, no matter the cost. After breakfast, they were marched back to the mines. The tunnel seemed darker today, the crystal walls more threatening. Han Solo picked up his hammer and began to work, but his mind was elsewhere. He was counting guards, timing patrols, looking for weaknesses in the Valdorian security system. Overseer Velthak was more nervous than ever. The alien paced back and forth on his observation platform, his 6 eyes constantly scanning the prisoners below. His energy whip crackled with power, as if he expected trouble at any moment. "Something's got him spooked," Tejo whispered from the crystal face next to Han Solo. The young man's hands never stopped moving, his hammer striking the wall, in steady rhythm. To any watching guard, he looked like a model prisoner, but his eyes were alert and intelligent. "Good," Han Solo replied. "Nervous guards make mistakes." As the morning wore on, Han Solo began to notice patterns. The Valdorian guards moved in groups of 3, switching positions every 2 hours. They carried energy rifles that could kill a human with 1 shot, but the weapons had a charge time of 3 seconds between shots. Their armor was strong, but had joints at the neck and legs where a sharp blade might find purchase. Not that the prisoners had any sharp blades. They had hammers and picks for mining, but those were counted and locked away at the end of each shift. Still, a determined person could do a lot of damage with a mining hammer if they got close enough. Around midday, something happened that changed everything. A new group of prisoners was brought into the mines, fresh from the transport ships that brought humans from the conquered worlds. Among them was someone Han Solo recognized. Captain Yan Wu had been Han Solo's commanding officer during the defense of the Sol Orbital Station. He was older now, his black hair streaked with gray, his face marked by new scars, but his back was still straight and his eyes still held the fire of command. The Valdorians assigned Yan Wu to Han Solo's work detail, probably thinking he was just another broken prisoner. They had no idea they had just put 2 of Earth's best military minds in the same place. "Commander," Yan Wu said quietly when the guards were out of hearing range. It was not a question. Somehow he had recognized Han Solo despite the months of imprisonment and hard labor. "Captain," Han Solo replied, "it's good to see you alive. I wish I could say the same about the rest of the fleet." Yan Wu's voice was bitter. "The Valdorians scattered us across the galaxy, but some of us are still fighting." Han Solo's heart jumped. "How many?" "Not enough, but more than they think." Yan Wu glanced around to make sure no guards were watching, then leaned closer. "There's a resistance network. Ships hidden in asteroid fields. Bases on dead worlds. People like us working from the inside. We call ourselves the Free Stars." The name sent a thrill through Han Solo. The Free Stars. It sounded like hope. "What's the plan?" he asked. "Survive. Gather information. Wait for the right moment to strike." Yan Wu's hammer struck the crystal wall with controlled violence. "But first, we need to know what they're building in those eastern tunnels." Over the next few days, Han Solo and his growing group of allies worked to map the mine complex. Minji used her network of storytellers to gather information from prisoners in other sections. Tejo volunteered for extra work details that let him explore new areas. Dongwook made friends with the kitchen staff and learned about guard schedules and supply routes. But it was Haye Jin who made the most important discovery. She had been studying the crystals they mined, using her knowledge of physics to understand how they worked. What she found was terrifying. "It's not just a weapon," she told them during one of their secret meetings in the abandoned alcove. "It's a reality weapon. The crystals can bend space and time around them. If the Valdorians link enough of them together, they can create what we would call a dimensional fold. In simple words, Hansol said, they can make a planet disappear, not destroy it, make it cease to exist, as if it had never been there at all. Hyojin's voice was barely a whisper. Every person, every building, every memory of that world would be gone forever. The group sat in stunned silence. Hansol felt sick. This was worse than he had imagined. Not just death, but complete erasure from existence. How long before they finish it? Yanwu asked. Based on the construction rate and the amount of crystals they're processing, maybe 3 months. 4 at the most. 3 months to save 17 human worlds. It seemed impossible. But then Tae-ho spoke up. I found something today, in the eastern tunnels. There's a control room that the guards don't watch very carefully. They think it's just a storage area. But I saw computers, communication equipment, things that could be useful. How useful? Hansol asked. Useful enough to contact the outside? Maybe even to hack into their systems and see the weapons plans. For the first time in months, Hansol felt something like hope. If they could get into that control room, if they could access the Valdorian computers, they might be able to find a weakness in the weapon. They might even be able to contact the Free Stars and coordinate a real rescue mission. But first, they needed to get Tae-ho into that room without being caught. The plan they came up with was simple but dangerous. During the next shift change, when the guards were distracted by the prisoner count, Tae-ho would slip away from his work detail and make his way to the control room. He would have maybe 20 minutes before his absence was noticed. 20 minutes to hack into alien computers and steal the most important information in human history. The day of the mission, Hansol could barely concentrate on his work. Every sound made him jump. Every guard patrol made his heart race. Around him, the other prisoners went about their daily routine, unaware that the fate of humanity might depend on what happened in the next few hours. The shift change bell rang at exactly 1400 hours Valdorian time. Hansol watched as Tae-ho put down his hammer and walked casually toward the tunnel entrance. To anyone watching, he looked like a prisoner heading to the waste facilities. But instead of turning left toward the sanitation area, he turned right, toward the eastern tunnels. Hansol held his breath and waited. The minutes crawled by like hours. Hansol tried to work normally, but his hands were shaking. Beside him, Minji hummed an old Korean folk song under her breath, the melody barely audible over the sound of hammers striking crystal. It was a song about hope in dark times, about light breaking through the longest night. 15 minutes passed, then 18, then 20. At 22 minutes, alarms began to sound throughout the mine complex. Red lights flashed from the tunnel walls, and the voice of the central computer echoed in harsh Valdorian clicks and growls. Tae-ho had been caught. Hansol closed his eyes and tried not to think about what the Valdorians would do to him. Their interrogation methods were legendary for their cruelty. Most prisoners broke within hours, but when he opened his eyes again, he saw something that gave him hope. Other prisoners were looking up from their work, confusion and curiosity on their faces. For the first time in months, something had happened to break the routine of their captivity. And in that moment of confusion, Hansol realized something important. The Valdorians were not as in control as they pretended to be. They could be surprised. They could be caught off guard. They could be beaten. The rebellion had begun, and there was no turning back now. The screaming had been going on for 3 hours. Han Sol tried to focus on his work, but every cry that echoed through the mine tunnels felt like a knife in his chest. Tai Ho was somewhere in the interrogation chambers, and the Valdorians were doing terrible things to him. The young man who had studied poetry and art was paying the price for their rebellion. "Stay strong," Minji whispered beside him. Her hammer struck the crystal wall in a steady rhythm, but Han Sol could see tears on her cheeks. He knew the risks. We all did. But knowing the risks and living through them were different things. Han Sol had sent soldiers into danger before, during the war for Earth. But this felt different, more personal. Tai Ho was not just a soldier following orders. He was a friend who had volunteered to risk everything for the hope of freedom. Overseer Velthok stood on his platform above them. All 6 eyes focused on the prisoners below. The alien's tail was moving back and forth like an angry cat. He was enjoying this. The screams from the interrogation chambers were music to his ears. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," Velthak announced, his voice amplified by the mine's communication system. "This is what happens to humans who forget their place. You are property of the Valdorian Empire. You exist only to serve. Any who try to resist will suffer the same fate." The prisoners kept working, but Han Sol could feel the change in the air. Something had shifted. The routine of hopeless labor had been broken. For the first time in months, people were thinking about something other than survival. They were thinking about resistance. That night, after the work bells had stopped ringing, Han Sol made his way to the meeting place. The abandoned alcove seemed smaller now, as if the walls were closing in. Minji was already there, along with Hyejin and Dongwook. Captain Yanwu had also come, his face grim in the dim light. "Any word on Taeho?" Han Sol asked. "He's alive," Yanwu said. "Barely. They moved him to the isolation cells on level 7. Heavy guard presence." "What did he tell them?" "Nothing important as far as I can tell. The boy has more spine than most career soldiers." Yanwu's voice was filled with respect. "But they'll break him eventually. They always do." Han Sol felt anger burning in his chest. "Then we get him out." "Impossible," Dongwook said. "Level 7 is a fortress. Guard posts every 50 meters. Automated weapons. Force fields. Even if we could fight our way in, we'd never fight our way out." "Maybe we don't need to fight," Hyejin said quietly. All eyes turned to her. "I've been thinking about what Taeho found in that control room. Before they caught him, he had time to see things, important things." "What kind of things?" Minji asked. "He told me the room had communication equipment. Not just local systems, but long-range transmitters. The kind used to contact other worlds." Hyejin paused, choosing her words carefully. "What if we could use those transmitters? What if we could send a message to the human colonies? Warn them about the weapon?" Han Sol shook his head. "The Valdorians would detect any unauthorized transmission. They'd trace it back to us in minutes." "Not if we did it right," Yanwu said slowly. "Not if we created enough chaos to cover our tracks." An idea was forming in Han Sol's mind. A desperate, dangerous idea that might just work. "The children," he said. "The human children in the education center. If we could create a distraction there, something big enough to draw guards away from the communication room." "You're talking about a full-scale revolt," Dongwook said. "The Valdorians would slaughter us." "Some of us," Han Sol agreed. "But not all of us." And if even one message gets through to the colonies, if we can warn them about the weapon, then our deaths will mean something." They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Around them, the alien machinery hummed its endless song of oppression. But for the first time, Han Solo thought he could hear something else in that sound, the faint echo of defiance. "There's something else," Minji said finally. "Something I learned from the kitchen workers. The Valdorians are bringing in new prisoners tomorrow, a whole transport ship full of humans from the outer colonies. Among them are some of our children." Han Solo's blood ran cold. "How many children?" "Maybe 200, ages 5 to 15. They're being brought here for advanced integration training." Minji's voice was bitter. "The Valdorians want to turn them into perfect slaves, humans who think like Valdorians." That decided it. Han Solo could accept many things. He could accept his own death. He could accept the destruction of human worlds. But he could not accept the slavery of human children. Some lines could not be crossed. "Tomorrow night," he said. "We strike tomorrow night." The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Using Minji's network of storytellers, they spread word of the plan to trusted prisoners throughout the mine complex. It was dangerous. Any one of them could betray the rebellion to earn favor with their captors, but it was a risk they had to take. He-Jin worked with a group of prisoners who had technical knowledge, planning how to access the communication systems. Dong-Wook organized the few weapons they could improvise from mining tools. Yonwoo used his military experience to plan the assault on the education center. And Han Solo tried not to think about how many of them would die before the sun rose again. The education center was in the upper levels of the mine complex, near the administrative areas where the Valdorian officers worked. It was a gleaming white building that looked clean and modern compared to the rough tunnels where the prisoners lived. Inside, human children learned to forget their heritage and embrace their captivity. As night fell, Han Solo made his way through the ventilation shafts that connected the different levels of the complex. The metal ducts were barely wide enough for a human body, and the air was hot and stale. But they were the only way to move through the complex without being detected by the guard patrols. Behind him came 12 other prisoners, all volunteers, who knew they might not live to see morning. They had no real weapons, just mining hammers and improvised knives made from scrap metal. Against Valdorian energy rifles and armor, they would be like children throwing stones at tanks, but they had something the Valdorians did not understand. They had nothing left to lose. The first guard post fell quickly and quietly. The Valdorian sentry never saw the hammer that crushed his skull. His energy rifle was Han Solo's now, and suddenly the odds seemed a little less hopeless. They moved through the upper levels like ghosts, striking fast and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Each guard post they took gave them more weapons, more hope. But Han Solo knew it could not last. Soon the Valdorians would realize what was happening and bring their full strength to bear. The education center's main hall was filled with sleeping children. They lay on simple cots arranged in neat rows, their young faces peaceful in sleep. Han Solo felt his heart break looking at them. These children should be playing in Earth's gardens, not dreaming in alien prisons. "Wake up," he whispered, to the nearest child, a girl who could not have been more than 8 years old. "We're here to take you home." The girl opened her eyes and looked at him with confusion. "Are you rebels?" she asked in a small voice. "Yes," Han Solo said. "We're rebels, and so are you." As the children woke and began to understand what was happening, Han Solo heard the sound he had been dreading. Alarms! The Valdorians had discovered the attack. "Move!" he shouted. "Everyone move!" The next few minutes were chaos. Children screamed and ran in all directions. Valdorian guards poured into the hall, their energy rifles flashing blue death. Some of the rescue team fell, their bodies smoking from rifle burns. But others pressed forward, using captured weapons to clear a path toward the exits. Han Solo found himself face to face with a Valdorian officer, a tall alien with elaborate markings on his gray skin. The alien's energy pistol was aimed at Han Solo's. "Heart! Surrender, human," the officer said in accented English. "Your rebellion is over." "No," Han Solo replied, raising his stolen rifle. "It's just beginning." The two weapons fired at the same time. The Valdorian officer fell with a smoking hole in his chest. Han Solo felt burning pain in his shoulder, but kept moving. There was no time to stop. No time for anything but the mission. So, the time the battle was over, half the rescue team was dead. But they had freed nearly 100 children and created enough chaos to cover Hyejin's infiltration of the communication room. As Han Solo carried a wounded child toward the tunnels, he could only hope their sacrifice had been worth it. Somewhere in the darkness, a message was being sent to the stars, a warning about the weapon that could erase worlds, a call for help that might be humanity's last hope. The rebellion had cost them everything, but it had also given them something precious. It had given them the chance to fight back. And sometimes, Han Solo thought as he disappeared into the tunnels with the rescued children, that was enough. Songs of ancient Earth. The children were hidden in the deepest parts of the mine, in tunnels so old that even the Valdorians had forgotten about them. Han Solo sat with his back against the crystal wall, watching over the sleeping forms of the rescued children. His shoulder still burned from the energy rifle wound, but he had wrapped it with torn cloth and tried to ignore the pain. Minji sat beside him, her voice soft as she told stories to the children who could not sleep. She spoke of Earth's green, hills and blue skies, of rivers that ran clear and forests where birds sang. The children listened with wide eyes, trying to imagine a world they had never seen. "Tell us about the dragons," whispered Subin, the 8-year-old girl Han Solo had first awakened in the education center. She had been born on a mining world and had never seen Earth, but she loved Minji's stories about the mythical creatures from old Korean tales. "Dragons are not just monsters," Minji said, her voice carrying the rhythm of an ancient storyteller. "In the old days, dragons were wise and powerful. They protected the innocent and punished the wicked. They could fly between the stars and speak to the hearts of heroes." Han Solo smiled despite their desperate situation. Minji had a gift for making hope sound real, even in the darkest places. But he knew that stories alone would not save them. The Valdorians were hunting them through every tunnel and chamber in the mine complex. It was only a matter of time before they were found. "Commander." The voice came from Yanwu, who had been standing guard at the tunnel entrance. "We have visitors." Han Solo reached for his energy rifle, but Yanwu held up a hand. "Friendly visitors," he said. "I think." 3 figures emerged from the darkness of the tunnel. 2 were human prisoners Han Solo did not recognize. The third was something he had never expected to see. A Valdorian, but one who moved carefully with his hands. "Visible and empty. My name is Captain Zexmar," the alien said in careful English. "I come to speak with your leaders." Han Solo kept his rifle ready but did not aim it. "Speak." The Valdorian was younger than most of the guards, with fewer scars on his gray skin. His eyes were different, too. Instead of the cold cruelty Hansol had seen in other Valdorians, this one's eyes held something like uncertainty. "I have been watching your people," Zexmar said, "studying your behavior. Your sacrifice for the children was unexpected." "Why?" Hansol asked. "Because we were told humans care only for themselves, that you are selfish creatures who would abandon the weak to save your own lives." The alien paused, as if struggling with difficult thoughts. "But this is not what I have seen." One of the human prisoners with Zexmar stepped forward. She was a middle-aged woman with intelligent eyes and hands stained with chemical burns. "My name is Jinnah," she said. "I was born on a Valdorian world, raised in their schools. I know their language and their customs." Hansol studied her carefully. "You're a collaborator?" "I was," Jinnah admitted. "For many years, I believed the Valdorians were right, that humans needed to be guided and controlled. But then I met Captain Zexmar, and I began to see things differently." "What changed?" Minji asked, still holding Subin close to her side. Zexmar answered, "I was assigned to study human behavior for the Integration Council. My job was to find ways to make your people more obedient, more willing to accept Valdorian rule. But the more I studied, the more I began to question what I had been taught." The alien gestured toward the sleeping children. "We were told that humans could not truly love their young, that parental bonds were weak and easily broken. But I have watched human prisoners give their food to hungry children. I have seen mothers die to protect babies they had never met." Hansol felt a strange sensation. Hope, but of a different kind than he had felt before. "You're starting to doubt your own people." "I am starting to doubt everything I was taught," Zexmar replied. "And I am not alone. There are others among my people who have begun to ask questions, who wonder if our empire is built on lies." Jinnah nodded. "That's why we're here. Captain Zexmar has information about the weapon project, information that could help you stop it." Hansol exchanged glances with Yeonwoo and Minji. This could be a trap. The Valdorians were known for their cunning, and using a sympathetic alien to gain their trust would be a clever move. But something in Zexmar's manner suggested he was telling the truth. "What kind of information?" Hansol asked. Zexmar reached into his uniform and pulled out a small device that glowed with soft blue light. "Technical specifications for the reality weapon, security codes for the construction site, and something more important than either of those things." "What?" "The location of the ancient human ship." The words hit Hansol like a physical blow. "What ship?" "A vessel from your early space exploration days. It crashed on this planet over 300 years ago before the Valdorians claimed this world. My people found it but could not understand the technology inside. They buried it deep beneath the mine complex and forgot about it." Hyojin, who had been listening quietly from the shadows, stepped forward. "What kind of technology?" "Quantum processors, gravity manipulators, energy systems, based on principles we do not understand." Zexmar's voice was filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. "Your ancestors built things that make even Valdorian science seem primitive." Hansol felt his heart racing. An ancient human ship hidden beneath their feet for centuries. Technology that could turn the tide of the war. It seemed too good to be true. "Why are you telling us this?" he asked. "Because I have seen what the reality weapon will do to your remaining worlds," Zexmar said quietly. I have read the target lists. 17 human colonies, including worlds where children play, in gardens much like the ones in your stories. He looked at Minji. I cannot be part of such destruction. Minji stood up, still holding Subin's hand. You would betray your own people for us? I would save both our peoples from a crime that would stain the galaxy forever, Zexmar replied. The weapon my people are building is an abomination. If we use it, we will become monsters that cannot be forgiven. Han Sol made his decision. Show us this ship. The journey to the ancient vessel took them through parts of the mine complex that had been sealed for decades. Zexmar led them past rusted barriers and through tunnels filled with strange growths that glowed in the darkness. The air grew colder as they descended, and Han Sol could feel the weight of rock and time pressing down above them. Finally, they reached a massive cavern that stretched beyond the reach of their lights. In the center, partially buried under centuries of crystal growth, lay the remains of a human starship. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The hull was scarred by its crash landing, but the basic structure was intact. Strange symbols covered the metal surfaces, and parts of the ship still glowed with faint energy. It looked like something from a dream of the future, built by humans who had dared to reach for the stars. The main computer core is still functional, Jinnah said, reading from a handheld scanner. The quantum processors are in standby mode. This ship has been waiting for someone to wake it up. He-Jin approached the ship with reverence, her hands tracing the ancient symbols on the hull. This is pre-war technology. From the first great expansion, before the corporations took over space exploration. The engineers who built this were artists as much as scientists. Can we use it? Han Sol asked. If we can get inside, if the systems still work, then maybe. He-Jin's voice was filled with excitement. The quantum processors alone could give us computing power beyond anything the Valdorians have, and if the gravity manipulators are functional, we could move the ship, Yanwu finished. Turn it into a weapon against the reality device. Zexmar nodded. But you will need time to study the systems, to understand how they work. And time is something we do not have. The weapon will be complete in less than 2 months. Then we'd better get started, Han Sol said. As they worked to find an entrance to the ancient ship, Minji gathered the children around her and began to tell them a new story. It was about brave humans who found a sleeping dragon deep beneath the earth, and how they woke it up to fight against the forces of darkness. The children listened with wonder, not knowing that this time the story was true. Deep in the bowels of the ship, ancient systems began to hum with life. Quantum processors that had slept for 3 centuries started to calculate impossible equations. Gravity manipulators tested their strength against the pull of the planet's core, and in the darkness of the mine, human voices rose in an old song about dragons and heroes, hope and defiance. The Valdorians who heard it did not understand the words, but they felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air of the tunnels. Something was awakening. Something that had been waiting a very long time to fly again. The breaking of bonds. The ancient ship's computers spoke in a voice that sounded like music. It was the first time Han Sol had heard the language of his ancestors, the words that humans had used when they first reached for the stars. The ship called itself Eternal Dawn, and it had been waiting 300 years for someone to wake it from its long sleep. Systems are coming online, He-Jin said, her hands moving across control panels that glowed with soft golden light. The quantum processors are running diagnostic checks. The gravity manipulators are testing their range. Everything is functioning beyond our wildest hopes. Han Sol stood in the ship's command center, surrounded by technology that seemed more like magic than science. Through the transparent walls, he could see the rescued children playing in the lower levels of the ship. They had adapted quickly to their new home, and their laughter echoed through corridors that had been silent for centuries. "How long before we can use the ship's weapons?" he asked. "That's the problem," Hyejin replied. "The ship doesn't have weapons. Not in the way we think of them. It was built for exploration, not war." Captain Zexmar, who had been studying the ship's design with fascination, looked up from his own workstation. "Perhaps that is exactly what we need," he said. "A ship built for peace trying to stop a weapon built for destruction." Over the past weeks, more Valdorians had come to join Zexmar. Not many, but enough to matter. They were mostly younger officers who had grown uncomfortable with their empire's methods. They brought with them crucial information about the reality weapon's construction and security, but they also brought troubling news. The weapon was ahead of schedule. Instead of 2 months, they had perhaps 6 weeks before it would be ready to erase human worlds from existence. "We need to strike soon," Yanwu said during one of their planning meetings. "Every day we wait, more Valdorian ships arrive to guard the weapon. Soon there will be too many for even this ship to handle." Han Sol nodded, but his mind was on other things. Through the ship's sensors, he could see what was happening in the mine complex above them. The Valdorians had begun executing prisoners. Every day, 10 humans were killed as punishment for the rebellion. The executions were broadcast throughout the complex to break the spirits of those who remained. "We can't save everyone," Minji said quietly, reading his thoughts. "But we can make their sacrifice mean something." She was right, but it still hurt. Han Sol had been a soldier long enough to know that war required hard choices. But knowing it and living with it were different things. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Subin, the 8-year-old girl who loved dragon stories, had been exploring the ship's lower levels when she found something the adults had missed. A sealed chamber that contained what looked like toys, but were actually something far more important. "They're not toys," Hyejin said, studying the small devices Subin had found. "They're quantum resonators, built to interact with the ship's main systems in ways I'm still trying to understand." The devices were beautiful, shaped like flowers made of crystalline metal that sang when touched. When Hyejin connected them to the ship's computers, something amazing happened. The Eternal Dawn began to extend its influence beyond its own hull. "It's not just a ship," she said with wonder in her voice. "It's a network controller. These resonators can link with any quantum-based technology within light years of here, including the crystals the Valdorians are using for their weapon." Han Sol felt his heart racing. "You mean we can control their weapon?" "Better than that, we can turn it against itself, use its own power to collapse the dimensional fold it creates. Instead of erasing a planet, it would erase itself." But even as hope bloomed in Han Sol's chest, he knew it would not be simple. The reality weapon was heavily guarded, surrounded by Valdorian warships and protected by energy shields that could stop anything short of a direct hit from a battlecruiser. "We'll need a distraction," he said. "Something big enough to draw their attention away from the weapon." "I have an idea," Jinna said, "but you're not going to like it." Her plan was as dangerous as it was clever. The Free Stars resistance network that Yanwu had mentioned was still active, hiding in asteroid fields and dead systems throughout Valdorian space. If they could coordinate a simultaneous attack on multiple targets, They might be able to spread the enemy forces thin enough for the eternal dawn to reach the weapon, but it would mean revealing the ship's existence to the Valdorians. Once they knew about the ancient vessel, they would throw everything they had at stopping it. There would be no second chances. "It's our only option," Han Sol said after considering all the alternatives. "Send the message to the Free Stars. Tell them to prepare for Operation Broken Chain." The name came from one of Minji's stories, about prisoners who broke their chains not through strength alone, but by working together and never giving up hope. It seemed fitting for what they were about to attempt. As the ship's communication systems reached out across the galaxy, Han Sol tried not to think about how many people would die in the next few days. The Free Stars had maybe 50 ships scattered across a dozen systems. The Valdorians had thousands. But sometimes, he reminded himself, it was not about the size of the army. Sometimes it was about the strength of the cause. The response from the Free Stars came faster than expected. Commander Hyun-soo, who had taken over leadership of the resistance after most of the original commanders were killed, sent a simple message. "We are ready. Tell us when and where." But as they prepared for the final battle, Han Sol discovered that not everyone agreed with their plans. Dong-wook, the former farmer who had become one of their most trusted fighters, came to him with concerns. "The weapon," Dong-wook said. "What if we destroy it, but some Valdorians escape? What if they build another one? What if they decide to wipe out humanity the old-fashioned way, with bombs and lasers?" Han Sol had been wondering the same thing. Even if they stopped the reality weapon, the war would continue. The Valdorians still had the stronger fleet, the better technology, the advantage in numbers. Destroying one weapon would not end the conflict. "Then what do you suggest?" Han Sol asked. "We use the weapon," Dong-wook said quietly. "Turn it on their homeworld. End this war before they can hurt any more humans." The suggestion hit Han Sol like a cold wind. Use the Valdorian weapon to commit genocide against their people. It would be justice in a way. They had planned to do the same to humanity. Why not strike first? But then he thought of Captain Zexmar and the other Valdorians who had risked everything to help them. He thought of Jinnah, who had been raised by aliens but chose to stand with humanity. He thought of Minji's stories about dragons who protected the innocent, even when the innocent included their enemies. "No," he said finally. "We're not going to become the very thing we're fighting against." Dong-wook's face hardened. "Even if it means losing the war, especially if it means losing our souls." The argument that followed was bitter and painful. Other prisoners took sides, some supporting Dong-wook's desire for revenge, others agreeing with Han Sol's refusal to commit genocide. For a few terrible hours, it seemed like the rebellion might tear itself apart before it could strike at their enemies. It was Minji who found the solution. She gathered everyone in the ship's main hall and told them a story. It was about a great war between the Bay, forces of light and darkness, and how the warriors of light were tempted to use dark weapons to win quickly. But every time they used such weapons, they became a little more like their enemies, until in the end, there was no difference between the two sides. "We are not fighting to destroy the Valdorians," she said when the story was finished. "We are fighting to save both our peoples from becoming monsters. If we use their weapon to commit genocide, then we prove they were right about us all along. We prove that intelligence without wisdom leads only to destruction." When she finished speaking, even Dong-wook was nodding. The argument was settled, not through force or threats, but through the power of an old woman's wisdom and an ancient story about choosing to remain human even in the darkest of times. As The final preparations for Operation Broken Chain continued. Han Solo found himself thinking about what would come after. If they survived the battle, if they stopped the weapon, what then? How do you rebuild a galaxy torn apart by war and hatred? But those were questions for tomorrow. Today there was only the mission. Today there was only the hope that somewhere, among the stars, the children of two different worlds might learn to live in peace. The ancient ship hummed with power as it prepared to fly again. And in its corridors, human voices rose in song, carrying words of defiance and hope across the darkness of space. The new dawn, the eternal dawn, rose from the depths of Kepler 442b like a star being born. 300 years of crystal growth fell away from its hull as the ancient gravity manipulators lifted it through rock and stone toward the surface. Han Solo stood on the command deck, watching through the ship's sensors as they broke free from the planet that had been their prison. Above them, space was filled with Valdorian warships. Dozens of them, their hulls gleaming like metal insects against the black void. They had been waiting for this moment, ready to destroy the ancient human vessel before it could threaten their weapon. But the Valdorians had made a mistake. They had underestimated the power of hope. Operation Broken Chain is active, Yan Wu reported from the communication station. Freestar's forces are engaging Valdorian fleets in 7 different systems. The enemy is spreading their forces to respond. Han Solo nodded, watching the tactical display. Red dots representing Valdorian ships were moving away from their position, rushing to defend other targets. But there were still enough left to make this a desperate fight. "Incoming transmission," Jinnah announced. "It's Admiral Korth Van, the Valdorian fleet commander." "Put him through," Han Solo said. The main screen shimmered, and suddenly they were looking at a Valdorian officer whose uniform was covered in medals and whose eyes burned with cold fury. Admiral Korth Van was old even by alien standards, his gray skin marked with scars from a dozen wars. "Humans," the Admiral said, his voice filled with contempt. "You think your ancient toy can stand against the might of the Valdorian Empire? You are insects compared to us." "Maybe," Han Solo replied. "But even insects can sting." Behind Korth Van, Han Solo could see the reality weapon. It was massive, a crystalline structure that stretched for kilometers in every direction. At its heart, millions of mining crystals had been arranged in perfect geometric patterns, their combined energy focused through quantum lenses into something that could tear holes in reality itself. "Surrender now," Korth Van continued, "and I will make your deaths quick. Continue this foolishness, and I will ensure every human in the galaxy suffers before they die." Han Solo thought of Tai Ho, still imprisoned somewhere in the depths of the Bo mine complex. He thought of all the prisoners who had died during the executions. He thought of the children playing in the ship's lower levels, finally free after years of captivity. "No," he said simply, "we will not surrender. Not today. Not ever." The Admiral's face twisted with rage. "Then you will die like the animals you are. All ships, open fire." The battle that followed was like nothing Han Solo had ever seen. The eternal dawn moved through space like a dancer, its ancient systems responding to threats faster than thought. Valdorian energy beams that should have cut through the ship's hull were absorbed and redirected. Missiles that should have shattered the vessel simply disappeared into folded space. But the ship was not invincible. Warning lights flashed across. The control panels as overloaded systems began to fail. The Valdorians had more ships, more weapons, more experience with space combat. and they were fighting with the desperation of a people whose empire was being challenged for the first time in centuries. "We can't keep this up much longer," Hyejin reported from the engineering station. "The quantum processors are running at maximum capacity. If we push them any harder, they might overload." Han Sol looked at the tactical display. They were still too far from the reality weapon to use the quantum resonators. They needed to get closer, but every meter they advanced cost them dearly. That was when Captain Zexmar stepped forward. "There is another way," he said. "The weapon has a weakness, a flaw in its design that the builders never noticed." "What kind of flaw?" Han Sol asked. "The crystals that power it are arranged in a specific pattern, one that creates maximum energy output. But if you disrupted that pattern, if you changed even one element of the design, the entire system would collapse, inward on itself." Hyejin's eyes widened with understanding. "A cascade failure. The weapon would implode, taking the entire Valdorian fleet with it." "But someone would have to get inside the weapon to cause that failure," Zexmar continued. "Someone would have to manually disrupt the crystal matrix from within. It would be a suicide mission." Han Sol felt something cold settle in his stomach. How long would someone have once they started the disruption? Maybe 10 minutes before the cascade became unstoppable. Not enough time to escape. The command. Deck fell silent except for the sound of weapons fire against the ship's shields. Han Sol looked around at his companions. At Yan Wu, the career soldier who had never stopped fighting for his people. At Hyejin, the scientist who had turned her knowledge into a weapon for freedom. At Jinnah, who had chosen humanity over the only family she had ever known. At Minji, whose stories had kept hope alive in the darkest places. Any one of them would volunteer for the mission. All of them would die willingly if it meant saving the human colonies from destruction. But Han Sol knew there was only one choice he could make. "I'll go," he said. "No," Minji said immediately. "You're needed here. The ship responds to you better than anyone else. Without you, we'll never get close enough to the weapon." "Then who?" Han Sol asked, though he already knew the answer. "Me," said a small voice, from the back of the command deck. Everyone turned to look at Subin, the 8-year-old girl who had found the quantum resonators. She stood straight and tall, her young face serious but unafraid. "I'm the smallest," she said. "I can get through spaces the adults can't, and the resonators respond to me better than anyone else. I found them, remember? Maybe that means something." "Absolutely not," Han Sol said. "I won't send a child on a suicide mission." "You're not sending me," Subin replied with the stubborn logic that only children possess. "I'm choosing to go, just like in Minji's stories. The smallest dragon was the one who saved everyone." Before anyone could stop her, Subin ran to the quantum resonators and picked up 3 of the crystal devices. They began to sing in her hands, their music harmonizing with the ship's systems. "She's right," Hyejin said quietly. "The resonators are bonding with her bioelectric field. I've never seen anything like it. It's as if they were designed for human children." Han Sol knelt down so he was at eye level with Subin. "Do you understand what you're asking to do?" "I understand that if I don't do this, all the other children will die," she said. "On all the human worlds. That's not acceptable." Her words were too mature for her age, but her eyes were those of a child who had seen too much suffering and wanted it to stop. Han Sol felt his heart breaking, but he also felt something else. Pride. This little girl embodied everything humanity had been fighting for. "The escape pods," he said finally. We'll program one to get you out after you start. The cascade. Program it, yes, Subin said with a sad smile that made her look ancient. But we both know there won't be enough time. The next few minutes passed in a blur of preparation. Subin was fitted with a small spacesuit designed for the ship's maintenance systems. The quantum resonators were calibrated to disrupt the weapon's crystal matrix. Emergency signals were prepared to warn the Freestar ships to retreat to minimum safe distance. As the Eternal Dawn fought its way closer to the reality weapon, Hansol found himself thinking about all the choices that had led to this moment. The decision to resist instead of accepting slavery. The choice to save the children instead of focusing only on escape. The determination to remain human even when faced with inhuman enemies. "We're in range," Hyejin announced. "Launching escape. Pod now." On the main screen, they watched as the small pod containing Subin shot toward the reality weapon. Valdorian fighters moved to intercept it, but the pod was too small and fast for their weapons to track effectively. "She's inside the weapon," Jinna reported. "Beginning disruption sequence." What happened next was both beautiful and terrible. The reality weapon began to change color, its crystalline structure shifting from cold blue to warm gold as Subin worked with the quantum resonators to alter its fundamental nature. Instead of a device for destroying worlds, it was becoming something else entirely. "Cascade failure in progress," Hyejin said, her voice filled with awe. "But it's not collapsing. Inward, it's transforming." The weapon's energy, instead of imploding, began to spread outward in waves of golden light. Wherever the light touched, miraculous things happened. Damaged ships found their hulls mysteriously repaired. Injured beings discovered their wounds, had healed. The hatred and fear that had driven the war began to fade, replaced by understanding and compassion. Admiral Korthvan's face on the communication screen changed from fury to wonder. "What is this? What has the child done?" "She turned your weapon of destruction into something else," Hansol said. "Something that builds instead of destroys. Something that heals instead of hurts." In the final moments before the transformation was complete, Subin's voice came over the communication system one last time. "Tell Minji her dragon stories were true. Tell her the smallest dragon really can save everyone." The golden light reached its peak intensity and then began to fade. When it was gone, the reality weapon had vanished. In its place was something impossible. A new star, small but bright, that would shine for millions of years. And scattered throughout the system, on every ship and station, Valdorians and humans looked at each other with new eyes. The artificial hatred that had driven their war was gone, burned away by the light of a child's sacrifice. What remained was the possibility of understanding, of forgiveness, of peace. 6 months later, Hansol stood in the council chambers of New Geneva, representing Earth in the first joint human-Valdorian assembly. Captain Zexmar sat beside him, no longer an enemy but a friend working toward a shared future. Minji had established schools throughout the former war zone, teaching both human and Valdorian children about the importance of stories, of hope, of choosing compassion over vengeance. Hyejin led research teams that combined human and Valdorian science to create wonders neither species could have imagined alone. And in the center of the Kepler system, a small star continued to shine. A memorial to a little girl who had loved dragon stories and understood that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the smallest hearts. Hansol often looked up at that star and remembered Subin's words. The dragon stories were true, and in the end, it really had been the smallest dragon who saved everyone.